The wheel of dread. What if death wasn't the end? What if dying wasn't the worst part? What came before death was the part that truly broke you? Not a quick beheading, not a hanging where the rope snaps your neck in an instant. I'm talking about a punishment so drawn out, so grotesque, that even the executioners had to be trained to not kill too fast. Ever heard of the breaking wheel? No? Then buckle in. Because this isn't some twisted legend. This was real, and it haunted Europe for centuries. Picture a foggy morning in a medieval town square. The cobblestones are still wet with dew, and the smell of damp wood and old ash fills the air. Vendors have closed up their stalls. No one's selling bread today. Today, the people have gathered for something else. At the center, a raised wooden scaffold, and on that platform, a man bound in chains. Beside him, leaning upright, is a large wooden wheel, the kind that once rolled along wagons. But this one isn't for travel. This wheel is for breaking. You can hear the whispers in the crowd. Someone spits. A child clings tighter to their mother's cloak. Everyone knows what's about to happen, and yet they all watch. This was Europe, the Middle Ages. Justice didn't work like it does today. It wasn't about evidence or due process. Guilt could be proven by dunking you in water or making you walk across hot iron. But once you were found guilty, however that happened, punishment came swift and in public. And among all the grotesque methods they came up with, breaking on the wheel was something. Not just into what the breaking wheel was, but why it was used. I'll walk you through how it worked, step by brutal step, what it did to the body and the mind. This wasn't punishment, but a public demonstration of what fear could do when dressed up as law. But more importantly, we'll look at the why behind the why. Why did people cheer it on? Why did religious leaders bless it? And how in the world did something this cruel become normalized? Because, make no mistake, this wasn't some rare punishment. This was institutional, legal, accepted. And if that doesn't chill you, it should. Quick break here. If you're already leaning in, if your jaw dropped at least once, do me a favor. Hit the like button, subscribe for more untold history, and drop a comment below. I want to know, would you take the wheel or the axe? Because after this chapter, you might rethink your answer. Next up, we'll head into the courtroom, if you can call it that, and explore how the wheel became part of the official system of justice. And spoiler, justice had nothing to do with fairness. Justice in iron and wood, the medieval court, and the breaking wheel. We like to believe justice is about truth, about fairness, evidence, arguments, the right to speak. But in medieval Europe, justice wore a different face. It looked more like ritual, theater, and fear. And if you were unlucky enough to be standing trial back then, you weren't hoping for a fair verdict. You were praying for a quick death. Because if that wheel was mentioned, you already knew. Imagine walking into a cold stone hall. The walls echo with every footstep. There's no jury, no defense team, no warm faces in the crowd, just a judge in robes, maybe a priest, a scribe, a few guards. And you, shackled, dirty, probably bruised from the first round of questioning, you're told to kneel, not to speak. And when your sentence is read, it doesn't come as a surprise. You already knew the whispers. Maybe you stole a loaf of bread, but they say you killed a man. Or worse, insulted the king. Then it comes, let the accused be broken upon the wheel. And just like that, your fate is sealed. The breaking wheel had roots going back to ancient times, but medieval Europe, that's where it matured into something almost perfected, especially in places like France and the Holy Roman Empire. By the 1200s, the wheel wasn't just used, it was written into law, It had rules. It had procedures. Executioners trained in it like doctors train in surgery. Only the goal wasn't to heal. It was to prolong and to remind everyone watching the law wasn't just about order, it was about pain. Now this punishment wasn't doled out for every little crime. You had to really catch their attention. Violent murder, armed robbery, rebellion, heresy. Yeah, that'd do it. And even then, the punishment could vary. Nobles, if they ticked off the wrong people, might get the wheel too. But they'd often be granted a little mercy first. Maybe a blow to the heart before the real breaking started. But if you were poor, a peasant, you'd get the whole show, from beginning to long, drawn-out end. Here's the really twisted part. The sentence wasn't vague. It wasn't just death by wheel. No, it was detailed, almost like a blueprint. It would say exactly where to hit, how many times, what to break first, which limb would be twisted through which spoke, and how long the body should be left for birds to pick clean. Sometimes they even decided how fast or slow the executioner should work. One record read, "Strike the arms and legs at the joints. Do not damage the head or chest until the 11th blow." That wasn't justice. That was performance art. You'd think this kind of horror would be done in secret, right? Nope. It was a public event. Vendors showed up. People brought their kids. Songs were sung. Drinks were poured. The town would gather like it was a festival. It sounds sick. And it is. But when you've grown up hearing stories of righteous punishment and divine wrath, this just becomes part of life. Some came to weep. Others came to cheer. But everyone came. Because missing the wheel? That was like skipping church. Speaking of church, let's talk about its role. Contrary to what you might think, the church didn't always swing the hammer, but it sure didn't stop it either. In fact, it often blessed it. When someone was declared a heretic, the church would pass them along to secular authorities and turn a blind eye to what happened next. Spoiler, they knew. And still, they'd send priests to bless the executioners, offer prayers before the breaking started, claim it was for the soul's salvation. It wasn't punishment, it was penance. The wheel became holy. So why was this accepted? Because it worked. People obeyed. The wheel became more than a punishment, became a tool for social control. It said, step out of line, and this is what happens. The blood-soaked body wasn't just for the executioner. It was a message for the village, for the next town, for every man, woman, and child who thought about stealing, fighting, rebelling. You don't need a million laws if one wheel does the trick. Now and then, you'd hear about mercy. But that usually meant the criminal got one quick blow to the heart before the breaking began. Still had to be tied to the wheel, still had to be displayed, still had to rot. But at least he wasn't screaming while it happened. These weren't acts of kindness. They were politics, optics. A noble's death had to look different, more dignified. The poor, they just got pain. While Germany and France made the wheel famous, they weren't the only ones. Sweden used it for brutal family murders. Poland held on to it into the 1700s. Russia? They sometimes combined it with flaying or burning. Each country added its own twist. But the goal never changed. Break the body, control the people. Screams on the scaffold how the breaking wheel was used. Imagine waking up on what you know is your last day alive. But instead of peace, instead of final words with loved ones, you're being dragged through the streets, wrists tied, face swollen from the last interrogation. People stare, some point, a few cheer. One child hides behind their father's cloak. And there it is, leaning against the scaffold like it's waiting for you. That damn wheel. You knew it was coming, but seeing it in the flesh? That's when reality punches harder than any guard ever could. Here's how it typically played out, according to records from the 16th and 17th century executions. First came the parade of shame, a march through the village where the condemned was usually forced to carry the wheel that would be used to destroy them. It wasn't just transport, it was symbolic, like being made to dig your own grave. Next, the scaffold. Simple, really. Wooden planks, a couple poles, sometimes a cross beam. But it wasn't the setup that made people nervous, it was what happened on it. Because the wheel wasn't just for looks. It was a precision instrument. Brutal, yes, but methodical. Executioners didn't use just anything. They had a kit. An iron rod or bar, usually about the size of a crowbar, used to deliver the actual brakes. Ropes or chains to tie the body down, and of course the wheel itself, usually 4 to 6 feet wide, reinforced, heavy. The condemned was stretched out flat, arms and legs tied tight across a wooden beam or large X-shaped frame. The idea wasn't to kill right away, and nope, it was to ruin. The process was all about where the bones were broken, and in what order. Executioners had a specific order. This wasn't random violence, it was a kind of grim choreography. They started with lower legs, shins, both sides, thighs, the femurs, forearms, upper arms, pelvis, shoulders, and finally, if the person hadn't yet passed out, the chest, right over the heart. Some regions called for 8 blows, others went as high as 24. The goal was clear: break every limb, but keep the person breathing, keep them alive. Long enough to make them part of the show. Once the body was broken, it didn't end there. The executioner, often with help, would thread the victim's limbs through the spokes of the wheel. They twisted arms between gaps, bent shattered legs around the rim, forced the mangled body to conform to the shape of the wheel itself. This wasn't just a symbolic act, it was meant to display the damage. Some victims were tied in a kind of grotesque star shape, others looked like they'd melted over the frame. And when the sun hit it just right, you'd see everything, every bruise, every bone pushed the wrong way, every twitch, if they were still alive. After the weaving came the final insult. The wheel, now decorated, was hoisted into the air and placed on a tall post, anywhere from 10 to 20 feet high. There the victim would hang, twisted, contorted, bleeding. Some were still conscious, and some, horrifyingly, remained that way for hours. There are accounts from 1587 from a town in Germany where a man survived on the wheel for 36 hours. Guards would watch him from a distance. Villagers came to look. And when birds started circling, no one shooed them away, because that was part of the sentence. People always imagine the pain is the worst part. But pain ends eventually. It numbs. It blurs. The real horror? It's what happens inside the skull. The moment when you realize this is your ending, that there's no rescue, no miracle, no justice coming, only time, wind, and whatever creatures show up first. Some begged for death, others hallucinated, and a few just stared at the sky, unmoving, until their last breath slipped out. It wasn't just the body being destroyed, it was the person erased slowly while the world watched. Now and then, a priest would climb up to offer last rites. It's a surreal image, a man of God whispering mercy into the ear of someone whose ribs are pushing out of their chest. Sometimes they'd confess, crying through cracked lips. Other times they'd curse the priest, the king, the crowd. One man, his name lost to time, reportedly said, "May your children hear my screams when they sleep." Then he laughed. And then, silence. Let's ground this in real history. Peter Stump, the so-called werewolf of Bedburg, accused of witchcraft and cannibalism. He had his limbs broken with red-hot pincers, then was placed on the wheel. They didn't stop there. They beheaded him and burned the remains. In France, Robert Damiens, who attacked King Louis XV, was broken before being drawn and quartered. Witnesses said he didn't die until the horses took him apart. The wheel was rarely enough. It just started the show. Want to know what people remember most? The sound, not the sight. Not at first. The crack of bone, the snap of tendons, the muffled, wet sound of a scream through blood, the low groan when a body's own weight pulls a joint loose, the crows already circling, the creak of the wood as the wind turns it just slightly, over and over. It haunted people, even the executioners. Some quit, others drank themselves numb, and a few, they got too good at it. A reminder posted high in the sky that in medieval Europe, death wasn't just about ending someone. And remember, now that you've seen how the wheel worked, we need to ask why. Why did people allow this? Why did entire cities accept it? In the next chapter, we'll break down the psychology and propaganda that made the wheel not just possible, but popular. More than death, the psychological war behind the wheel. Priests blessed executions. Some even stood by during the breaking. The logic? Suffering was holy. Pain cleansed sin. The condemned had a chance to purify their soul through agony. Some execution sites had altars right next to the scaffold. The wheel stood just feet from the cross. See the twisted poetry? People actually believed the more you suffered, the more likely your soul would find peace. And so they broke bodies in God's name. Here's what made it work. The breaking didn't just end a life. It rattled the entire community. People would talk about it for months. Kids would whisper stories about the man who screamed for 2 days straight. Mothers used the wheel as a warning. Behave or the soldiers will take you to the square. And men, they worked harder, paid their taxes, kept their heads down, because in the end, the wheel didn't stop crime. It stopped resistance. Let's be real. It was a show, a brutal, bloody play performed for the public. And the crowd? They weren't just watching. They were part of it. Some came for justice, others for revenge. Some just wanted entertainment. And don't judge them too fast. These people lived hard lives, disease, war, starvation. Every day was a struggle. A public execution wasn't just punishment. It was distraction. It was ritual. For a few hours, the pain was happening to someone else. And that's maybe the darkest part. It became normal. Parents brought their kids. Merchants set up shop. The condemned weren't seen as people anymore, just sinners, criminals, others. It's easy to look back and say, how could they cheer? But we do it today in different ways. We consume pain like a product, in shows, in games, online. We just dress it up better. The wheel reminds us how easy it is to get used to cruelty if you see it often enough. Kings and queens weren't fools. They knew exactly what they were doing. When rebellion brewed, when taxes sparked riots, when loyalty was slipping, they didn't send letters. They sent wheels. And like a monarch's signature, the wheel left a mark no one could ignore. Ever wonder why it was a wheel? It wasn't random. Wheels represent cycles, eternity, fate, turning fortune. They keep moving, they grind. In Christian art, the wheel was sometimes tied to divine judgment. You can't stop fate. You can't escape sin. And once the wheel turns against you, well, there's no turning it back. Being broken on it? It was poetic. In the worst way, a literal turning of the tide from man to memory. Here's a weird twist, maybe the weirdest. The wheel is actually named after St. Catherine of Alexandria, a woman who was sentenced to die on one, but according to legend, the wheel shattered the moment she touched it. A miracle. She was beheaded instead and became a saint. And what do we call those spinning fireworks today? Catherine wheels. Kind of funny, kind of chilling. History's little joke. Stanford psychologist Philip Zimbardo, the guy behind the famous prison experiment, once said, "Evil is knowing better, but doing it anyway." That's what the wheel teaches us. The horror wasn't just in the blood. It was in how easily people learned to look away, how quickly they accepted it, how faith, politics, fear all joined hands to say, "This is right." Not because it was, but because it was useful. The breaking wheel wasn't a glitch in the system. It was the system. It worked because it made people feel safe, even as it destroyed lives. It kept the rulers in power, the church in favor, the people in fear. And when fear becomes tradition, when pain becomes law, you don't need a better system. You just keep the wheel turning. Echoes through time, from execution, ground to historical reflection. The wheel has stopped. The bodies are long gone. The blood soaked into the dirt centuries ago. The crowds scattered. The scaffold crumbled. And yet, something remains. Something sticks in your throat when you hear the word. Something cold. Because history doesn't always stay in the past. Sometimes it hides under modern robes. Sometimes it whispers through old laws and quiet fears. And the breaking wheel. Its echo still rings. You'd think a torture device this horrific would have been overthrown in some big dramatic moment. A revolution, a rebellion, a moral awakening. Nope. The wheel didn't end because people got kinder. It ended because people found new ways to kill faster. The 18th century rolled in with new philosophies, the Enlightenment. People like Voltaire and Beccaria stood up and said, This isn't justice, this is savagery." Beccaria's book on crimes and punishments lit a spark. He argued for proportion, humanity, reason, things the wheel didn't understand. And then the French Revolution happened. Suddenly, the state wanted equality in death. The guillotine, sharp, fast, and efficient, replaced the old theatrical tortures, and by the mid-1800s, the wheel was all but retired, hung up, forgotten, but not erased. Here's the twist: we didn't get better, we just got smarter at hiding the pain. Instead of a public scaffold, we got sterile execution chambers. Instead of screaming crowds, we got legal paperwork. Instead of bones breaking, we got electricity, needles, gas. But the goal stayed the same: control, finality, a message. The methods changed. The intentions? Not so much. Pain is still used. It's just cleaned up, branded, repackaged. So, no, the wheel didn't end. It just evolved. Funny how something so gruesome found its way into our stories. Ever watched Game of Thrones? Cersei talks about breaking the wheel, a metaphor for ending the cycle of power. That phrase didn't come from nowhere. Writers, artists, filmmakers, they love the wheel. Not because it's entertaining, though it kind of is, but because it represents everything about tyranny that we don't say out loud. And then there's irony. You've probably seen those spinning fireworks, the ones that light up and whirl around in a spiral. Yeah, they're called Catherine wheels, named after a saint who was supposed to be broken on one, but survived because the wheel, legend says, shattered before it could hurt her. So now, we name toys after it. Go figure. So what's the takeaway? Why do we still tell this story? It's not just for the gore, not just the shock value. It's not about making people sick to their stomachs, although that happens. It's because the wheel teaches us something. And most terrifying of all, it reminds us that no one wakes up thinking they're the villain. Not the kings, not the judges, not even the man swinging the iron bar. Let's dig into the mind for a second. The people who designed the wheel, they weren't monsters, they were humans, they had families, they said prayers, and yet they found a way to turn suffering into policy. That's what makes the wheel so haunting. It's not just a weapon, it's a reflection of what we're capable of how easily logic can justify horror. Today, we look back and think, we'd never let that happen again. But are you sure? Look around. Isolation, dehumanization, mass incarceration, public shame, silencing dissent. The wheel might be gone, but the mentality? It's still very much here. In some quiet museums, old wheels still exist, rusted, unused, just sitting in corners, behind glass, untouched. Tourists stare, kids take pictures, some laugh. But if you listen close, really listen, you can almost hear the past breathing, the creak of wood, the crack of bone, the hush of a crowd leaning in. You don't need to see blood to feel the weight of it. Some things just stick to a place. Not all stories have heroes. Some are just reminders. This one, the story of the breaking wheel, doesn't give us a happy ending. It gives us a warning, a quiet one whispered through time. This happened. People watched. No one stopped it. We tell it so we don't repeat it, so we know what to look for, so we recognize the wheel, no matter what name it hides behind. Because once you see it, truly see it, you start to recognize the turning again and again in systems, in power, in silence, and maybe, just maybe, we learn how to stop it. If you stayed through this entire journey, thank you. Thank you for choosing not to look away. Now tell us, what do you see in the wheel? Was it justice, terror, a relic of the past, or a symbol still spinning in our time? If this story moved you, shocked you, or made you pause, hit the like button. Drop a comment below and let's talk. And if you want more untold stories like this one, subscribe, share. Help keep history honest. Because remembering matters and forgetting is how it begins again.